God, it's lovely out.
Don't make unnecessary journeys. Don't take risks on treacherous roads. And don't swim in the sea.
Despite what the Irish weather might tell you, it's actually summertime, and every year we take a trip from Armagh down to Cork to see our extended family, which is great because it's always nice to see them and get a change of scenery from our normal countryside home to an even more rural countryside home. We've been doing this for well over 20 years, and over that period of time, quite a few things have changed. Especially in convenience, because nowadays, thanks to the expansion of motorways, it only takes about 4 to 5 hours to get to the opposite end of the country if you know where you're going. But back in the early 2000s, when we had to take country roads, it took, and bear with me here, 9 hours. You could watch nearly all of the Lord of the Rings trilogy in its original theatrical cut, and by the time you get to the bit where Sam carries Frodo up Mount Doom, it feels like it's directed more at you than him.
Come on, Mr. Frodo. I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you.
Also, I was car sick. It was not a pleasant time for anyone. So because of that aforementioned travel time, my parents had to find a way to hold over me and my two brothers on the trip down. They ended up with a PSP, not for games really, but instead to watch a handful of films like Spider-Man 2 and Bender's Big Score. And in my case, I got this little touchscreen portable you probably know as the Nintendo DS. If you were born after 2005, you probably wouldn't remember this, but anyone and everyone had one of these. They were as prolific as smartphones are nowadays. If there was a fun day at your primary school back in the day, you would see a few with Beyblades, maybe some with Match Attack cards, but everyone had a DS. It's one of those things which is so ingrained into that particular era of pre-internet culture where it was just starting to become more readily available that it has this more innocent charm to it. And for me, this was the system I have the most memories attached to, not just for the games I played on it, but the trips that they are connected to. And this is what I want to talk about today, because I don't have some grand statement to make or want to convey a message. I just want to take a chilled look back on some older games and why this comfort media is still so important to me and to countless others in times of hardship. So, without further ado, let us dive in. If people are familiar with Nintendo, then they were definitely aware of what Pokemon is, and it was during the DS when the brand was arguably at its most saturated, having 2 generations plus a remake and an abundance of spin-offs. If you wanted a Pokemon game, you got a variety to pick from. Mystery Dungeon? Check. Dash? Check. That weird one with real historical figures? Sure, you can have that one too, why not? My first one was Ruby on the Game Boy, followed by the highly underrated Colosseum on the GameCube, which had this cool road trip vibe to it, and the soundtrack absolutely slapped. Now, given all the talk surrounding a certain upcoming remake, I have a few things to say about my first game on DS. Pokemon Ranger released just before Diamond and Pearl, sitting in this sweet spot between generations 3 and 4 that have this more down-to-earth quality to them before reaching a galactic scale, or having so many Pokemonsters they couldn't even fit them into the later games, if they even tried. This might beat the nostalgia talking, but I always have a preference for those older designs. They just have this more distinct feel to them compared to later generations where, despite working off the same template, they kind of just feel like they're cannibalizing themselves in a sense. There's still some really cool ones that come in the later generations, but they don't really stick with you as much. When you first start, you're given a letter accepting you as one of the titular Pokemon Rangers, and after selecting your gender are shown how the capture mechanic works, as you use the touchscreen to politely make them your friend. If that hasn't got you excited, well, sorry, because it's going to be nothing but circles from here on out. Also, when you successfully capture one, the team you assemble follows you around in the world, but unlike the more standard mainline games, you rarely hold on to the same Pokemon for long, as you use them for traversal and also progression in the story missions. After that, they are set free, which always had this great feeling of improvisation rather than just having the same few types you'd use again and again. In my playthroughs, I liked capturing the free legendary titans and then just wander into town with them, which made me feel cool. Which is not something I've ever experienced in real life. The more laid-back nature was something I could easily enjoy and show my other cousins. Because at its core, Pokemon has always been a great icebreaker that gave a lot of quiet kids, myself included, something to talk about and share with others. Everyone has their own favorite starters, their first games, and their favorite overall, so while it may not be at the top of anyone's list, Pokemon Ranger always comes to mind when I think of under-discussed entries in big multimedia franchises. Speaking of which, if you've spent any amount of time looking at modern video games, you've probably noticed the push towards photorealism and detail over a more distinct art style. Something that might look good in the moment, but years later will be rendered obsolete by the ever-growing power of modern machines. Which is why the cartoonish style of The Wind Waker still holds up remarkably well and has this timeless look to its visuals, with many of the characters and environments having this round, softer look to their designs akin to the original Dragon Ball or even One Piece. It's a style of Zelda game which I believe aesthetically holds up significantly better than the more edgy Twilight Princess which came out 3 years later. But this actually isn't the entry I want to talk about, or even the follow-up Phantom Hourglass. This one doesn't even have a boat. Spirit Tracks is one of those games which not many people have played, but those who do have a huge reverence for it, or at least that's what I can gather from my friend group. I got this game around the time of my confirmation, and while my parents wanted to make sensible decisions like put all that gift money into a bank account, I didn't get to where I am through logical decisions. So with all that Catholic money, I got a DSi XL and Spirit Tracks in the year 2010, and I just fell in love with it. This technically wasn't my first Zelda game, as we had that GameCube collector's disc with our copy of Mario Kart, so Majora's Mask does hold that honor. And while it is probably my favorite entry overall, Spirit Tracks is the one that properly got me into Zelda. Although I will admit that this game is very much a product of its time, tied to the system it was built for. And not just for the touchscreen, but in other gimmicks as well. Like, you meet all these magicians who help fix the world, and you play a tune with them, but it requires you to give CPR to the DS microphone. And let me tell you, you get a lot of weird looks in the bus when you try to do that. It also might seem odd for a story with an end-of-the-world threat to be called lighthearted, but it has this particular vibe to it which makes it endlessly endearing. It's also one of the few entries that gives Zelda more of a presence and personality despite being an invisible ghost. Having her along on the journey feels more active, along with many of the other colorful characters along the way. I mean, the main villain is a tiny ginger man with 2 big hats to cover his horns. What's not to like? Truthfully, I want to talk more about Spirit Tracks, but I'm going to leave it for the time being because I want to save it for a future video. You could probably tell that this video is quite different from my usual stuff, and the reason for that is I originally had this much bigger project planned, but then it got too ambitious and overly long to the point that it just wasn't any fun to work on. So I needed a break from it, and after getting my second COVID jab, I took that yearly trip down to Cork to get a breather. And much like every other year, this small home away from home is quiet. There's no trace of a city, but instead rural countryside. It's the perfect place to take a step back from the stress of modern life. But it was on this most recent trip, I've been thinking about how much things had changed, not just in the surrounding shops, but also myself. It was actually in this room here where I recorded that first Prince of Egypt video, mainly because I was bored and found a small microphone lying about. Being here always creates a sense of nostalgia and has me thinking of comfort media that I would have played or watched around that time. For those unfamiliar, the term describes any form of film, book, game, or piece of media that brings a sense of comfort or relief. It's designed to be helpful in alleviating anxiety or generating positivity. I don't think there's a definitive way to label any one piece of media as comfort because it really depends on the person you are. You say Percy Jackson, I say Skullduggery Pleasant. You mention Ace Attorney, I bring up Professor Layton. You have Stranger Things, I have The In-Betweeners. It's not necessarily required to be lighthearted, but in broad strokes, they are stories designed to help someone through a difficult period and provide a sense of relief that may be missing in one's real life. So with this in mind, I've saved one last game I'd like to talk about. Fire Emblem Three Houses doesn't seem like it should belong in this list. It's a tactical JRPG focused on commanding infantry units through turn-based battles. It's a game defined by its multitude of menus and subsystems to be read and understood while engaging in these daily activities of teaching, fishing, and talking. This doesn't sound like it should be comforting, especially with that permadeath system meaning you can permanently lose some of your students. But the more time I sunk into Three Houses, it actually started to provide a sense of satisfaction that isn't immediately apparent. Because you don't like it after your first battle, it comes from the decisions you make and the characters you choose to spend that time with. I went down the Crimson Flower route, and this decision fundamentally changed how I interacted with the Black Eagles. Over the course of that 60-hour playthrough, it made me want to see everything, try different battalion orders, find all the crests, and see every single dialogue exchange possible. Seeing Bernadette go from an anxiety-ridden shut-in to actual functioning human being is sad, wholesome, and eventually cathartic to see her slowly open up more to the world around her. And it's not just this one character that you see these relationships form with, it's everyone from the students to the teachers. It's all these characters which gave me the one thing that I was not able to really feel much of last year. A sense of consistency, and seeing these characters trying to be better and chase their dreams made me want to be better, so I got back into jogging. When I started my final university project, that OST kept me motivated during those long hours of writing and editing. All of this from a game I wouldn't have touched if a friend hadn't recommended it for me. So, in a way, this video is my tribute to some of my comfort games. This isn't anything special because the chances are you've already had that same experience. Not with Three Houses, but with another game, a book, a show, or whatever. Something that generated these same feelings within you, made you want to be a better person. Everyone has that one show, that one story, which becomes their anchor in the hectic storm that is life. So while this has been my weird dive into some games that mean the world to me, I'd also like to take a moment to hear about what your comfort media is. Whether it's Ace Attorney, She-Ra, the films of Studio Ghibli, lo-fi remixes, whatever. And basically, if there's a moral to this story, please give Three Houses a chance. It's a special game that means the world to me, and I hope it can mean the world to you too. Thank you so much for watching.